thought I knew what a broken heart felt like. I thought it was a sudden, sharp pain, a scream into a pillow, a door slamming shut. But I was wrong. A broken heart isn't a loud thing. It's the quietest sound in the world. It is the silence that fills a house that was once a home. It is the space in a bed that is still warm. It is looking at the person you love and realizing you are the last person they want to see. And, for me, that silence had a name. It was my cousin, Sarah. My story doesn't start with drama. It begins with ordinary, beautiful happiness. I met David on a rainy Tuesday. I was hiding under a bus shelter, my hair soaked. He jogged up, shaking water from his jacket like a friendly dog. He smiled, and I noticed a small chip in his front tooth. It made him look kind, not perfect. We shared that small, dry space for 20 minutes. We talked about our favorite books and how we both hated coffee. It was that simple. For our first date, we went for a walk. No fancy restaurant. Just a long walk by the river, talking for hours. That became our pattern. We were best friends before we were anything else. He held my hand, and it felt like my hand had finally found its home. We built a life one small, happy piece at a time. We got a small house with a big, messy garden. David loved to grow vegetables. I loved to fill the house with flowers from the market. Our life was a collection of small routines. Saturday morning pancakes. The silly arguments over what to watch on TV. The way he'd always leave one light on for me if I came home late from work. We wanted a family. That was our dream. We talked about it for years. We pictured a little girl with curly hair. A little boy with my stubbornness. We dreamed of laughter and chaos and a house even fuller than it already was. But life doesn't always listen to our dreams. After 2 years of trying, we saw a doctor. Then another. The words were gentle, but they hit like stones. Unexplained infertility. Low probability. Options are limited. Each appointment felt like a door closing, one by one, until we were standing in a very dark hallway. The dream of a family began to feel heavy. It was no longer a hope we shared. It became a sadness I carried. And I carried it alone. You see, David processed things differently. He was a fixer. If something was broken, he would find a manual, take it apart and put it back together. But you can't fix this. You can't take a broken dream and screw it back into place. So, he retreated. He started working later. He would spend hours in the garden, pulling every single weed until his hands were raw. He was trying to fix a world he could control because the one inside our home was falling apart. And I closed in on myself. The sadness was a thick fog. I would go through the motions of my day. Work, cook, clean, smile. But inside I felt hollow. I felt like I had failed him. I had failed us. Every month was a cycle of fragile hope and crushing disappointment. And with every cycle, I felt myself pulling further away from the man I loved. Our conversations became quiet. Our silences became loud. We were two ghosts living in the same house, passing right through each other. This is where Sarah comes in. Sarah is more than my cousin. She was my first friend. We grew up together. We shared secrets under blankets with flashlights. We cried on each other's shoulders after the first heartbreak. She was the vibrant, colorful one. I was the quiet, steady one. We balanced each other. She lived a few towns over. When David and I were first married, she was always at our house. She brought music and laughter with her. She'd tell wild stories that made David laugh until he cried. She was a part of our foundation. When the trouble started, she was my rock. She'd come over with ice cream and bad movies. She'd let me cry without trying to find a solution. She'd just hold my hand and say, "I'm here." She was the bridge between David and me when we couldn't find our way to each other. She started coming over more often. She said she was worried about me. About us. I was so grateful. In my loneliness, she was my lifeline. I didn't see that she was becoming his too. It started with small things. Little shifts in the air. I'd be in the kitchen, staring out the window, lost in my thoughts. And I'd hear them talking in the living room. They'd be on the sofa, and David would be laughing. A real, genuine laugh. I hadn't heard that sound in so long. A part of me was happy to hear it. But another part felt a tiny, cold pinch in my heart. Why could he laugh with her? Why not with me? One evening I came out of the shower. I heard their voices from the garden. I stood at the window and watched them. They were standing by David's vegetable patch. Sarah was listening intently as he pointed at different plants. He was talking, his hands moving. He looked animated, alive. He hadn't looked at me that way in months. I shook the feeling away. I was being silly. It was just Sarah. Then the conversation started to include me less. We'd all be sitting together. I would say something, and it would land in the quiet room. A moment later, Sarah would tell a joke, and David would light up. They started having little jokes I didn't understand. They'd mention a movie they'd both seen, or a song they'd heard. "When did you see that movie?" I asked once. There was a slight pause. A flicker of something in David's eyes. "Oh, Sarah mentioned it last week. I ended up watching it on my own one night. You were working late." It made sense. But it didn't feel right. One Saturday Sarah came over. I was feeling particularly low. The weight of everything was just too heavy. I was quiet, curled up on the chair with a book I wasn't reading. David and Sarah were in the kitchen, making lunch together. I could hear them. They were a team. Chopping, sizzling, laughing. I felt like a guest in my own home. I got up to get a glass of water. I stood in the doorway for a moment, unseen. David was at the stove. Sarah came up beside him to look into the pan. She stood very close. Her shoulder touched his arm. He didn't move away. It was just a second. A tiny, meaningless moment. But it felt like a shout. I walked in. The laughter stopped. The air went stiff. "Everything okay?" David asked. His voice was careful. "Just getting water," I said, my own voice sounding strange to me. Sarah smiled at me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Lunch is almost ready. We're making your favorite pasta." "We are." They were a we. I nodded and went back to the living room. The pasta tasted like nothing. I tried to talk to David about it that night. We were in bed, the lights off, lying back to back. "Do you think Sarah is here too much?" I whispered into the darkness. He was silent for a long time. "She's your cousin. She's just trying to help." "I know," I said. "It's just, you two seem very close lately." He turned over. I could feel his movement in the bed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "She's the only one who understands what we're going through. She listens." The words felt like an accusation. She listens, unlike me, who was too lost in my own sadness to hear him. "I listen," I said, but it was a weak, small sound. "Do you?" he said, and then he turned back over. The conversation was over. That was the first time I felt truly afraid. The loneliness I felt now had a new shape. It wasn't just about the baby we couldn't have. It was about the husband I felt I was losing. The next few weeks were a slow, quiet earthquake. Sarah was at our house almost every other day. She had a key. Sometimes I'd come home from work, and she'd already be there. She'd be sitting with David at the kitchen table, 2 cups of tea between them. The conversation would stop when I walked in. I started to feel like an intruder. One night, I had a work dinner I couldn't get out of. I called David to tell him. "That's fine," he said. His voice was flat. "Sarah said she might stop by with some dinner for me anyway. Don't rush." I hung up the phone. The world felt tilted. He hadn't sounded disappointed at all. He had sounded relieved. The work dinner ended early. I drove home, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I didn't know what I was expecting to find. I just knew I needed to be home. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked warm. The lights were on in the living room. I saw their shadows moving inside. For a long minute, I just sat in the car, watching my own home like a stranger. I walked to the front door. I didn't use my key. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. I stepped inside. The house was quiet. Too quiet. And then I heard it. The soft sound of crying. It was coming from the living room. My heart jumped. Was David okay? I hurried to the doorway. And I saw them. They were on the sofa. Sarah was crying. Not loud sobs but quiet, shaking tears. And David was holding her. It wasn't a friendly, comforting hug. It was a tight, intimate embrace. Her face was buried in his shoulder. His hand was stroking her hair. His eyes were closed. He looked peaceful. I must have made a sound. A gasp. A shuffle. David's eyes snapped open. He saw me. For a second we just stared at each other. His face showed no surprise. Just a deep, deep sadness. Sarah pulled away. She wiped her eyes quickly. I'm so sorry, she stammered. I had a bad day. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The air was too thick to breathe. It's not what it looks like, David said. But his voice had no strength. I looked at my husband. I looked at my cousin. And I saw the truth I had been refusing to see for months. It looks, I said, my voice strangely calm, like you are holding my cousin because she is upset. Is that not what it is? Yes, but... David started. Then it is exactly what it looks like, I said. I turned around. I walked out of the room. I went upstairs to our bedroom. Closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly. And I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. I heard the front door open and close. Sarah had left. A few minutes later my bedroom door opened. David stood there. He looked broken. We need to talk, he said. We didn't talk that night. I couldn't. The words were stuck in my throat, behind a wall of pain. I just shook my head and went into the spare room. I slept there, on a bed that smelled of dust and loneliness. The next morning we faced each other in the kitchen. The silence was a physical presence between us. Nothing happened, he said finally. You have to believe me. I do believe you, I said. And I meant it. I didn't think they had kissed. I didn't think they had slept together. Not yet. But something is happening, David. Don't lie to me. He sank into a chair. He put his head in his hands. I don't know what's happening, he whispered. I'm just so lost. And she gets it. She understands how hard this is. How hard what is? I asked, my voice trembling. Losing a baby we never had? Or being married to me? He looked up, his eyes full of tears. Both, he said softly. That one word shattered me. It was the truth I had been fearing. He told me everything then. It all came pouring out. He told me how he felt I had disappeared into my grief. How could he not reach me? He felt like he was living with a shadow. He told me how Sarah had started texting him, just checking in. Then it became daily. She sent him funny memes. She asked about his day. She listened to his frustrations about work, about life, about me. She became his friend, his confidant. The person he turned to when he was sad. The person who made him laugh. She makes me feel seen, he said, and the shame in his voice was palpable. I know it's wrong. I know it is. But when I'm with her, the heaviness goes away for a little while. I listened. I listened to my husband describe the emotional affair he was having with my cousin. He didn't use those words. But that's what it was. He had given her his heart piece by piece, in 1,000 small conversations. He had let her into the most private corners of his life, our life. The physical part, he swore, had not crossed a line. But the emotional line had been crossed long ago. I love you, he said, his voice desperate. I never stopped loving you. This is a mistake. A huge, terrible mistake. I looked at him. The man I had built my life with. The man I had dreamed of raising children with. And I felt a love for him that was so deep, it ached. But I also felt a betrayal that was so profound, it chilled me to the bone. You gave her what was mine, I said quietly. You gave her your sadness. You gave her your laughter. You gave her the parts of you that I used to hold. Maybe you didn't mean to. But you did. He had no answer. I packed a bag. I told him I needed time. I needed space to think. He didn't try to stop me. He just sat at the kitchen table, looking at the life we had built, now lying in ruins around him. I went to a small hotel. For 3 days I did nothing but feel. The pain was incredible. It wasn't just one pain. It was many. There was the pain of David's betrayal. The man I trusted most in the world had found comfort in another woman's arms. Even if they were just emotional arms, it hurt the same. And then there was the pain from Sarah, my cousin, my sister. She saw me drowning. And instead of throwing me a lifeline, she swam over to my husband. She saw our brokenness. And she walked right into the middle of it. That hurt in a different, deeper way. It felt like a sickness in my family. But the strangest pain was the one of understanding. Because as much as it hurt, I understood. I saw my own part in this. I had let the grief swallow me whole. I had built a wall around my heart, and I had shut David out. I had left him alone in the storm. And when someone is drowning, they will grab onto any piece of driftwood they can find. Sarah was his driftwood. It didn't make it right, but it made it human. On the 4th day my phone rang. It was Sarah. I almost didn't answer, but I knew I had to. Her voice was small on the other end. "Can I see you?" she asked. "Please." We met in a public park. It was a cold, sunny day. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy and red. We sat on a bench. For a long time we just watched the ducks on the pond. "I am so sorry," she began, her voice cracking. "There is no excuse for what I did. I betrayed you. You are my family. And I failed you." I stayed quiet. Let her talk. "I thought I was helping," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I saw you both hurting so much. And I wanted to fix it. I started by being there for you. But then I saw how sad David was. And I started being there for him too. And somewhere along the way it changed. It became something else. I started to care for him. Too much." She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. And I will hate myself for it for the rest of my life." I believed her. I could see the genuine remorse in her face. She had gotten caught up in the drama of it. In the feeling of being needed. She had tried to fill a hole in our marriage, and in doing so, she had blown it wide open. "Do you love him?" I asked. It was the hardest question I have ever asked. She shook her head quickly. "No, not like that. It wasn't about him, not really. It was about feeling important. Feeling like I could save someone. It was selfish and terrible. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I took a deep breath. The cold air felt clean in my lungs. "I can't talk to you right now, Sarah," I said. "What you did. It broke a trust that can't be easily fixed. You were my sister. And you forgot that." She nodded, crying silently. She knew there was nothing else to say. "I need you to stay away from us," I said. "From David. From me. For a very long time." She just nodded again. We stood up. She walked away in one direction. I walked away in another. I didn't look back. I went home that afternoon. David was in the garden. He was just standing there, looking at the bare earth of his vegetable patch. Winter was coming. He saw me and his whole body tensed. He was waiting for his sentence. I walked up to him. We stood there, surrounded by the skeletons of the plants we had nurtured together. "I saw Sarah," I said. He flinched. And I believe her. I believe you. I don't think anything physical happened. But that doesn't really matter, does it?" He shook his head. "No, it doesn't. We have a choice to make, David," I said. "We can let this be the end of our story. This betrayal, this pain. We can let it define us. We can walk away from this house, this garden, this life we built. It would be easier in some ways." I paused, gathering my strength. "Or," I continued, "we can choose a different path, a much harder one. We can choose to stay. We can choose to fight for ourselves. But it can't be the way it was before. We can't just pretend this didn't happen." He looked at me, his eyes full of a desperate hope. "What do you want to do?" "I want to fight," I whispered. But we have to fight together. And we have to fight fairly. We decided to try. It was the hardest thing we have ever done. The first few weeks were awkward. We were like two polite strangers sharing a house. We tiptoed around each other. The silence was still there, but now we were both aware of it. We started couples therapy. It was uncomfortable. We had to say things out loud that we had been hiding for years. We had to talk about the grief of infertility. We had to talk about my loneliness. We had to talk about his feelings of helplessness. We had to talk about Sarah. It was painful. There were tears. There was anger. But for the first time in a long time we were talking. We were listening. Slowly we began to rebuild. Not the life we had before. That life was gone. We were building something new. Something more honest. More fragile but also more real. I learned to let David in. I learned to share my sadness with him instead of hiding it away. I learned that my grief was not a failure. It was just a part of our story. He learned to just be with me in the sadness. He learned that he didn't have to fix it. He just had to hold my hand. He learned to talk about his own fears, his own sense of loss. We started new routines. We began going for walks again like we did on our first date. We held hands. We talked about small things. We talked about big things. We rediscovered the friendship that was the foundation of our love. The shadow of Sarah began to fade. We had to set hard boundaries. She was not a part of our lives anymore. It was a sad loss but a necessary one. Some betrayals change a relationship forever. This was one of them. Months passed. The sharp, acute pain of the betrayal softened into a dull ache. It became a scar. A reminder of a wound that had healed, but had left its mark. One evening we were in the living room. The same room where I had seen them together. It was winter, and a fire was crackling in the fireplace. We were on the sofa, but this time we were sitting together. My head was on his shoulder. It was quiet, but it was a comfortable, peaceful quiet. David spoke softly. "I am so sorry," he said. "For everything. For not being the husband you needed. For looking for comfort in the wrong place." I looked up at him. At the man with the chipped tooth. My best friend. "I'm sorry too," I said. "For building walls when I should have been building bridges. For leaving you alone." He took my hand. "We were both lost," he said. "We just got lost in different ways. We didn't magically solve our infertility. That is still a part of our story. Some days are still hard. The longing for a child is a deep, persistent echo in our home. But we are facing it together now. We are exploring other paths. Adoption, fostering, or maybe, just maybe, building a different kind of family, one that is just the two of us, filled with a different kind of love. We don't know what the future holds. And that's okay. The dream of a child was a dream we shared. But the reality of our marriage, of the love we have fought so hard to save, that is what we have. And it is enough. It is more than enough. If I could go back and talk to that younger version of myself, the one hiding from the rain under a bus shelter, what would I say? I wouldn't warn her. I wouldn't tell her about the pain that was coming. Because the pain is a part of her story. It is a part of what made her and me who we are. I would just tell her this. Love is not a feeling that happens to you. It is a choice you make every single day. It is a choice to be kind when you want to be cruel. It is a choice to be understanding when you want to be angry. It is a choice to stay when every part of you wants to run. Our love story is not a fairy tale. There was no villain, not really. There were just three people, all of them flawed, all of them hurting, who made a series of terrible human mistakes. Our love story is a story of repair. It is about gluing the pieces of a broken vase back together. You can still see the cracks if you look closely. The vase will never be the same as it was. But it can still hold water. It can still hold beautiful flowers. In some ways, it is stronger at the broken places. David found comfort in my cousin's bed. Not a physical bed, but an emotional one. A space of easy understanding that should have been mine. But in the end, he came back to me. And I chose to let him in. And I found my comfort, my strength, not in the past, but in the messy, complicated, beautiful present we are building together. Day by day, choice by choice. The lesson I learned is a simple one. In life, storms will come. They will shake your house. They will threaten to tear down everything you have built. You cannot stop the storms, but you can decide who you want to be standing with when they pass. I choose David, and he chooses me. And in that choice, we have found a hope that is quieter but deeper than any dream we ever had before. You turned my echoes into a symphony. Your quiet listening was the bridge my story needed to cross from my heart to yours. If these words resonated with you, be the ripple. Share this. You never know which soul is drowning in a similar silence, desperately searching for a shore. Thank you for listening to my story. Until the next veil lifts, with love always.